again. We're just more or less experimenting here tonight, but we're going to swap around the tables. I'm going to let Brian ask the questions, and he can ask anything about war, finance, culture, the USA, whatever the heck comes into his mind. Let
Yeah.
now's your chance. I am on the hot seat.
Okay. What are the odds that we're going to have an explosive increase in prices in terms of fuel and maybe food before the end of the year?
It's an absolute given that the prices of diesel is going to go up and the price of gas is going to go up and the price of oil is going up. There is no way around that. At the bottom, at the end of the day, there's very little going through the Strait of Hormuz. And there's about a 60-day time limit between when it could go through the Strait of Hormuz and when it would hit the petrol station in Salt Hill. There's about at least 6 weeks transit plus the refining. So even at the best times, if the strait was open tomorrow, it could be about 3 months. Now, every single day I'm following the price of oil and it's going up and it's going up and it's going up. Let me just check to see what it is here at the moment. Crude oil is at 86.67. In the last a month ago, it was 74 at the bottom, about at the start of the month, $74.50. So it's up at about $11. That's only the beginning of it, without a shadow of a doubt
Yeah.
that the price of oil is going to go up.
Yeah.
The price of everything is going to, well, we don't know whether it's going to go up or not, but it's going to get more unobtainable. That is
Yeah.
oil, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think it's been planned a long time to enter into this scenario. I think that they wanted to, the powers that be that control the oil supply or whatever, they want to make you dependent on it, and then they were going to squeeze us that way. In other words, they've got power over you, and now you come back into them. I mean, the Americans, for example, meaning the American federal government, controls, the Venezuelan oil, controls its own oil supplies, and so you have to come if you're in the Caribbean, for example, you're the island of Cuba, you have to come begging to them, and that's what they're doing. So and that's the plan. It's designed to destroy the sovereignty maybe of small nations. That's what I think anyway. And as part of all of this, you'll own nothing and be happy. You're going to be owning nothing. This is just going to get worse. So
Not only is the oil coming from the Gulf being curtailed, but also if you look at the Ukraine-Russian war, as of late, the Ukrainian drones have been hitting the oil refineries in Russia. So it's basically taken the diesel production out of Russia. That means Russia cannot export any diesel whatsoever. Diesel is the big choke point because at the end of the day, nobody really cares about cars driving back and forth and over and about. The lifeblood of a society is the diesel. And I expect that now to be common. Diesel here is touching $6 a gallon, American gallon. It's certainly going to go to $10 a gallon diesel. That's my opinion on the diesel.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it is going to get worse like that. But you see, in some ways, it's a simple concept. You see, the powers that be. You talk about, you want to go on a protest or whatever. You actually need some money. You need diesel for your car to get there. So they're bearing down now on ordinary people. They're going to squeeze them,
I
and
have concluded that the protests in Ireland, for the last 2 years at least, is just a weapon to weaken the ability of the regular person to do anything at all. They have spent hundreds of euros going up to Dublin for a complete farce, marching around to no great avail at all. And from the big protest, which was, in my opinion, doing a scientific estimation of the crowd, was 30,000. Counting people on the side streets, I might push it out to 40,000. The most certainly was not 100,000. And those people traveling from great distances. I was speaking to a lady, she traveled up from Galway City with her daughter, and between the bus was $60, 60 euros, etc. And she said by the time the day was completed with a bit of food and a bit of shopping for the girl and whatnot, it was 300 euros. The whole idea, now that I look back on it, of the protest is to just um, empty out the purse of the regular person. So, sure enough, the numbers have been falling, and now the protests are done until we had the one with the farmers. The farmers' protest, they went up there and they blocked the streets and whatnot. They were wanting and wishing to get 20 cents off the gallon or whatever. That was absolute, in my opinion. This is just my opinion. I don't know what's wrong with those fellows. There should be no such thing as getting 20 cents off the gallon of diesel. All taxes should be taken off petrol, diesel, heating oil, and anything at all that is an essential of life, which is energy. And those fellows shouting about 10 cents or 20 cents on diesel was just an outrage because it didn't address the fact that there's a fellow driving, let's say, up from Kildare into Dublin every single day, paying for his petrol at an outlandish price. In a free society, there'd be no tax on that guy's petrol at all. The farmers, at the end of the day, came across as if the minute they got their request granted, they just packed their tractors and went off home. It was a disappointing thing. Now, there's another protest coming up. We'll see how that goes on the end of the month, but I don't expect much from it either.
But that that wouldn't be my impression. I think anyway the protests are an excellent idea, and I think that the powers that be are afraid of them, which is one of the reasons they come up with this scheme to crush the cost of living, so people can't go and protest. But what happened to the farmers? You see, there's another aspect to this that people kind of forget about. Your modern day Irish farmer has never been in a protest before. He knows nothing about it, and
Sorry, can you repeat that again? The modern Irish farmer has what?
has never been on a protest before. He
Yes,
doesn't
okay.
know, yeah, he doesn't know anything about it. So I was talking to the guys on O'Connell Street. So they come and they park their tractors on O'Connell Street, and the Gardaí told them where to park. They told me that. So it was, and then so I'm telling them, what are you going to do if the Gardaí tell you to leave? And I said, no, no, that's not going to happen. The Gardaí told us to park it. There's never any issue with this, and we're totally peaceful protest. And of course, that's what happened a few days later. The Gardaí told them to get lost. And what they don't understand is that the difference between a peaceful protest in Ireland and a supposed violent protest is entirely the actions of the Gardaí. There's nobody else involved. The fact of the matter is that the Gardaí frequently decide they don't like this peaceful protest, and they grab you by the scruff of the neck and throw you out of the tractor, then it's a violent protest. That's actually the way the thing works, and they didn't understand that. And when the wheel turned, when the state turned on them, it came as a great shock, and they left in a hurry, and so it was more precipitate than they realized it was likely to
So
be.
you're saying that the farmers who went up there were totally naive.
Yeah, I think that were a lot of them were naive. They thought that there is a right to peaceful protest in Ireland. In practice, there isn't, except now and again when the Gardaí have the the cameras on top of them, they sort of make a show of allowing it. But in reality, they'll close you down when they feel like it anyway.
So the farmers were just allowed to vent away and then, after 5 or 6 days,
Yeah,
told to go
and
home.
it's the same with the media. The media initially gave great publicity to the farmers' protest, more truckers and small businesses as well. And then, but then they just turned on them. And then, oh, it's violent. Oh, we didn't expect it to be violent. We were only supported the peaceful protest. And as I say, the violence is all created by the Gardaí in practice. That's the way it works now. But I totally disagree with you. I think the protests are an excellent idea, and they should be supported. And
Yeah.
some of them were supported, and they have changed the doctrine in Ireland with respect to mass immigration. It was the protests that did it, because we were never going to get any publicity in the media for anything that we did. The only way to change the media was the mass protest, and that succeeded. The ordinary Joe Soap in Ireland, especially in working class areas of Dublin or whatever, is now massively against immigration. And before this, they were afraid to say boo because they would be accused of being racist. So it has worked. It's very important and very useful, I think, anyway. And but now it's going to be 1,000 times more difficult, because if the price of diesel is already very high and it's already restricting people from getting around, and now if it doubles from that, it'll be well. That's the idea. So you see, people might be interested in. There's an analogy here. For me, your classic politician in both Ireland, say, and England is a Machiavellian. And the Machiavellian people, what they sometimes do is they say the exact opposite of what they actually do. And this is a fascinating concept. So if you think about it, about 10 years ago in Ireland, the opposition parties spent all their time talking about the housing crisis. They were going to fix the housing crisis. Now, they talked about this a lot longer before there was a housing crisis, which is the fascinating thing about it. Now, in actual fact, every step they took, the Irish political class, to fix the housing crisis of 10, 15 years ago, made it massively worse. And now we end up with a real housing crisis where we didn't actually have one 10, 15 years ago. We have a gigantic housing crisis now because the changes the state made in response to supposed housing crisis. Now the same. So that what they did was the Irish political class deliberately created a housing crisis among the native population to get rid of them. So they bring in immigrants. That was the plan. As simple as that. Now you listen to the Irish political class. For the last, say, 2, 3 years, it's the cost of living crisis. They go on and on and on about the cost. And okay, it's a little bit bad cost of living, but I think that's the Machiavellian phenomenon again. They're going to bring in a massive cost of living crisis, and so what you have now is going to get infinitely worse by their own actions and very deliberately. And again, they'll have a plan for that, and it's simply to keep people in check. It's to control people. If you're penniless, you can't afford to buy a drop of diesel for your car, you're not any threat to the system. That's the plan they have. And people out there probably say, was surprised at me, why, what steps have they taken to increase the cost of living crisis? Well, as you say, fuel is obviously a big deal, and it's mostly tax, and the tax is increasing on it. They're bringing in new carbon taxes on fuel on top of all the other, so they are worsening it deliberately. Why not? Just recently, a lot of poor people in Ireland, and I think in America, but maybe particularly in Ireland, who just try to get simple things for their houses. I don't know, something for cooking or whatever. They go on a Chinese website, and they can get some of these small little things. I don't know, for €3 or something like that. Recently they've introduced a system whereby the tiniest little thing you get on the Chinese website is now added on €3.70 for every single small item. So you could buy a thing for €1 and you have a tax now of €3.70. It's just incredible. Every step they take is to increase the cost of living. It's deliberate policy, and it's going to get an awful lot worse.
So what you're saying there, going on past experiences and taking what they did with the housing crisis, discussing it when it didn't exist, so
Yeah,
that when it did exist 2 to 3 years later, they were on the ball discussing it. That
yeah,
being the case, now they're discussing the cost of living crisis.
yeah,
But you're
yeah,
saying it hasn't come yet, which is telegraphing that in a few years, in a few months or whatever, there is going to be a cost of living crisis. So they're
yeah.
actually putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, believe it or not, I think that's the best way to judge the modern Irish political class. They're Machiavellians, so whatever they say, they'll do the exact opposite. I mean, seriously, whenever I listen to Micheál Martin, I'm not trying to rubbish the guy personally, but I always take that view. Whatever he says, I'm thinking, wow, he's doing the exact opposite. And that's how I know what he's up to. It is literally the way. And it's also in England. You listen to the new Prime Minister talking honestly about the cost of living. Okay, the cost of living has increased a little bit, but if you actually think about over the centuries or decades, the amount of inflation over the last few years is bad. It's not that bad. But I'm thinking that the way this will develop, they intend it to be very bad. They're going to go big time into that. And as I say, they'll take steps to address the cost of living problem, which will worsen it, because that's the usual policy. Mm.
Before we move on from the protests, has nobody came up with a more simplified version of protesting where you can protest locally? For example, constituency has five T. Let's take Mayo for example. Constituency has five TDs, I think, in Mayo, and instead of going to Dublin, why not go have 20 men go down to his office
Mm.
with signs saying you're a traitor or whatever? And if that doesn't get his attention, go by his house. Now, granted, some people say to me that, oh, there's a law against going by their houses. There's a law against everything.
Yeah.
You're not going down protesting, you're just walking by 10 fellows and, oh, by the way, TD, we don't agree with what you're doing here. And then just walk away or whatever. It's a simple thing. It's not creating fear or anything, but it is showing the fellow that these guys want to get my attention. And why don't people do that? Or are,
Well, well,
are the people that say to me that these guys leading I hear people saying to me, the guys leading the protest, they're just is it gatekeepers they use the term, and they're not really real at all. It's just it the leaders of all these protests are just phony balonies.
oh, a lot of the bar, it's true, yeah. But you see, you see, what you have to understand is the traditional policy of a state such as Ireland in addressing this issue. And the simple reality is it comes out of communism. And it was developed first, well, it was a long time ago. And the theory is that the way to control opposition is to lead it. It might seem a contradiction, but that is the policy. That's absolutely the policy. You get in there, you find out the potential opposition, and you control it by leading it. So you have, we'll say, Ballyback, whatever it is, and you're going to have an iPass center coming in. Now, if they think there's going to be a lot of opposition to it, etc., 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 they'll get in there and they'll get their man to lead opposition to that, really, from the very beginning. And it'll be done from the very beginning because then they have it, they build up the legends, what they call intelligence services, about the person. So he was the great man. He was out there at the very beginning, and therefore we have to follow him no matter what happens. And yeah, so there's an enormous plan afoot, and enormous effort on the part of the powers that be to control these things from the very beginning. And the plan was simply you let it roll, if you like, under your own leaders, and that will always keep the thing under wraps. But it didn't always work. Just because they have these plans doesn't mean they always succeed. In practice, people rolled with the punches. They went with these, in many cases, false leaders, but they had too big a protest. And the size of the protest did change public opinion. And then what happens is the false leaders stop calling protests. That's the actual story of the last year or two. When you talk about, oh, there's not much happening now, it's because the false leaders have by and large stopped calling protests because they're afraid of them. There was too many people turned up, and so well, you see, it doesn't always work from their point of view. Now, instead of controlling the opposition, in some cases they're just closing it down and forgetting about it. Because notice, for example, we have a lot of these small Irish political parties, like the Irish Freedom Party and whatever. They're now been just closed down. Before this, it was you create the false opposition and you lead it. Now they're just given up. So it doesn't always work from just because the powers that be have all of this power. It doesn't mean they succeed in everything they try either. You know.
So what you're saying is, if the protest, if the protest gains a bit of steam whatsoever, they've just got to close it down before it reaches a what's known as a critical point, a point of inflection, or whatever way you want to call it. Because
Yeah.
if it goes beyond that point, they can't control it. So all of a sudden, the fellow that was leading the protest, Tommy Protester, or whatever you want to call him, he's told to just, okay, you're done. That operation is over. Forget about it. And then there's no more protest, and everybody's looking around for a leader, and there is no leader because the natural leader wasn't allowed to rise to the top that it might have done otherwise. The leader was put out there to be pulled later on if necessary.
yeah. You see, there's another concept that you should throw in here. As I say, you have that basic one, how to control opposition is to lead it. But another very interesting concept, which people probably won't understand initially if they don't think about it, was said by the he was a long-term foreign minister of Great Britain. I forgot his name now. One of the Cecil family, and he became prime minister for about, I think a year or two, about 1900, about 1890 to 1900. I forgot the dates, but he described British foreign policy has been similar to punting a raft down a slow moving river. Now that's a very complicated thing to think about. But if you actually think about it, that's their other policy. You see, the powers that be know there's going to be opposition to mass immigration into Ireland. They know this. Now they're not therefore trying to stop it. They're not trying to stop the opposition as such, because that would be to dam it, if you like. And they know that it's like water that's going to get around. So you see, if they blocked it off altogether, they would lead to streams, if you like, that they don't control. So instead of that, they control it on the one hand, as I described, but then what they do is they channel it. They don't stop it. They channel it into particular streams where it's not as much of a threat to them. So what do they do in practical terms? You take this particular opposition to mass immigration. What do they do? Okay, first of all, they say, and they tried this initially. Oh, we're not opposed to mass immigration. We're only opposed to illegal mass immigration. So we don't have any objection whatsoever about this guy coming in from India or wherever it is, Africa, as long as he doesn't come in illegally. That's what they claimed. So in other words, they get the false leaders on top of the system, and that's what they sort of say. And that didn't wear. It's very interesting. There is a lot, to be fair, there's a lot of intelligent Irish people following this debate, and they're not to be fooled that easily. So that didn't work, but they tried it. Now, the second line is we don't mind mass. Yeah, oh, we're opposed to this illegal mass. And yeah, oh, it's too sudden and all the rest. It's not planned properly and blah blah blah, and it's creating chaos in housing. But of course, we're not racists. We don't oppose a race just because they're Indian or just because they're Nigerian. Oh no, and so that's the line now. So it's a civic thing. It's a question of policy and the question of the time. But we're not racist. In other words, it's never a question of Ireland for the Irish. You can never say that is the Irish are a race and they have a right to the land of Ireland. Because in the long run, they don't allow that. They want to have a polyglot of races without a given identity. That's the long term plan. So they can never allow the concept of race. And so that's what you do then. You get your false leaders in charge, and that's another one of the streams you can send them down. And so, for example, the Irish Freedom Party, they brought in as their main spokesman on immigration. He was an immigrant from Eritrea, a black guy from Eritrea. And that was to be the visible symbol of whatever you do, don't oppose it on grounds of race. There's no such thing as the Irish race, really. The black guy, the yellow, or fella from China, fella from India, whatever. We don't care. We're not no race aspect to it. And the guy, the fella from Eritrea, he lasted as the official spokesman of the Irish Freedom Party for about a week, I think. After that, they brought in an emergency meeting and actually put another guy as the spokesman because they got so much abuse on Twitter and all the rest of it. And then your man came forward, Herman Kelly, and he announced that, oh no, he was never the spokesman, or he's not the spokesman, meaning after they hold the emergency meeting and get rid of him, then he's no longer the spokesman. And that was a seminal moment. That was where they were going down another channel, and the people involved in this movement or whatever didn't wear it. So it's good that way. People aren't as easily fooled as the powers that be would like them to be. You know.
So anybody that's half sane whatsoever would realize immediately that Sherman Kelly then he wasn't real at all. It was just a joke bringing in this Eritrean person to be over his party policy on immigration.
Yeah.
If he was real, his IQ would be lower than the Eritreans.
Yeah. The practical reality is that an awful lot of people in this space that that get most of publicity are not real because that's just the way it is. And also you remember the other phenomenon they have about they hope to control all publicity. That's the number one area they're always most interested in: social media, any media outlet of the organization. They want to control that completely, so they will control all publicity of any type. And that also means that if there's an argument, generally speaking, if you have X against Y at any point, you can assume that both X and Y are part of this system, because even if it's only 5% support Y, that's publicity, and you can't give anybody publicity. That's not one of them. That's the theory anyway.
And it's absolutely vital that the argument will will continue indefinitely or as long as possible, because as long as the argument is going on, nobody else can rise up and uh, promote any sort of rational game plan whatsoever.
Yeah, but now we're moving from this sort of chess game, this kind of Orwellian phenomenon, into a more clear cut oppression. I think that this cost of living thing, they're just going to basically squeeze you dry. You won't have a penny left. You won't be able to do anything. And so they're just going to move. And also social media. So you want to have your protest. What do you do to advertise? You go to social media. They just want to blank it all out. That's what happens to me. I go looking for protests or whatever, to give them publicity, and I can't find anything on social media anymore. They definitely have done a big job on that. They are squeezing that big time on Twitter, on Facebook, and whatever. And so that's the other thing. They're just going to squeeze the. They're just giving up on largely on trying to misdirect them via false leaders and just going with the flat out oppression. But also the other obviously very interesting thing here, if anybody has been following this, is the recent thing that occurred in the last week or two, and which builds on a number of similar incidents of a number of months ago, whereby they claim that the IRA has come out against mass immigration. Now, whether it's true or not, I'm damned if I know. So I don't know how that'll work out. But they tried that a few months ago, but I think it's about half a year ago as well. But they did that just a few weeks ago. I don't know how that's or I'm not sure I believe them, to be honest with you. But anyway,
Well, they were supposed to make their presence felt in 2 weeks, and the 2 weeks have elapsed now.
mm,
And there
yeah,
will be, in my opinion, for what it's worth, that is completely just nonsensical. That was just never happens. There is nobody really with sidearms or a rifle going to
yeah, but it
take
will
pot
have.
shots at a Nigerian or whatever.
Yeah, but it allowed them in the short term to mobilize the full security state against the protest, against the anti-mass migration protesters. That it will allow. Behind the scenes, they'll turn the special branch and everybody onto that. And what's interesting on that, which I highlighted on your web forum there some time ago, about 3 months ago, 2 months ago, the Sunday Times brought out an article, I think it was under the byline of John Mooney, if I'm correct, and it stated quite explicitly that the special branch and the state agencies are behind the scenes manipulating the bureaucracy of the state against select individuals. They claimed that these are IRA dissidents. But for example, it stated in the article, this is the Sunday Times article, so don't mind blaming me as an conspiracy theorist, whatever. This is from Sunday Times, okay? It states that insurance, car insurance, they behind the scenes will cut off the car insurance of people who are in this system. They talked about social welfare, that the social welfare would be cut off. And in that article, they openly refer to it as political policing. And that's what they're doing. So you can see the power of the state as they bear down on top of protesters if they claim that the anti-mass migration protesters are part of the milieu of the dissident IRA. So you see, there is consequences of this, connection between they have great power behind the scenes that they can really deploy and destroy your life if they want to. You know?
I remember you saying at some stage that Ireland now is a completely communist state.
Yeah,
And the thing about it is the people in Ireland do not understand or do not recognize that they are living in a communist state. They seem to be oblivious to the fact that they're living in a communist state.
yeah, yeah. So some are. I do notice that. Like the reality is that there are people out there that they'd waffle about politics and just totally uninterested in it. And if you stood, or if your car went 2 inches onto their verge of grass that adjoins their house, they'll come out and they'll passionately, grab you by the throat. And I've met people like that. They think that their private property will be protected, and that they don't have to have any regard for their neighbors or their community. Or there's people like that in Ireland. And what we're going to have in the future, I think, is this. You'll know nothing and be happy. Their private property will be destroyed, is my guess, and maybe only at that time will they discover a community spirit. It's not realistic that you can live in your own little castle and everything be grand around you. It doesn't work like that. They say that politics, democracy, the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. An awful lot of modern Irish people are not eternally vigilant. They don't take any interest in politics or in their community, and they're going to find out that's a bad mistake, I think.
They're living in fear. They're living in fear of reality. They don't want to just address the situation that the state is going to be stamping down on them very, very shortly. They just do not want to recognize what's coming down the pike to them.
Yeah, but a lot of the time, though, it's the opposite. It's complacency. Some of these people have money in the bank. And they used to say about all Ireland that there was a great sense of community. If you wanted to borrow a half a cup of sugar, you could go to your neighbour because your neighbour is broke and penniless as well, and you help each other out. But the guy then that has a full bank account, there's hundreds of thousands in his bank account, he he doesn't feel the need to be nice to his neighbours, and so that in fact is a big element, and that's the one that's going to end because we're going to get this crash when we don't know, and we're going to get this house of living thing, and then the people will be poor, and that might change the dynamic of it a lot.
That's amazing. How is it that there has not come to the fore any genuine, half intelligent leader that will go out there on YouTube and develop a following? Is it just a case that the algorithm keeps him down, or is it a case of he doesn't exist?
Yeah, the algorithm will keep them down. Yeah, you're not going to get any publicity if you're an authentic fella, as a rule. You know, like I was thinking the other day that I think I've given 7 serious interviews on the Tume story that were never broadcast. I give them to various people, and they just, mysteriously, whatever, they never go around to broadcasting them. So I get, so I don't know. You wouldn't want to be paranoid, but that's the essential point. The good guys, you just don't hear from them. But also, it is something that has been rolling on a good while. Like as described, that Sunday Times article where they describe the state destroying the lives of people behind the scenes, I think is actually not something new. That was the first time it was publicly acknowledged in a major newspaper. But I think that's what happened. So what I'm talking about here is that what the Irish people would gravitate to is some guy in a wonderful suit who rolls up at a serious job, serious whatever, and he rolls up in a fancy car and he takes charge of whatever. That kind of successful guy is not likely to be authentic in this space because the behind the scenes they have already been doing a job on people, and more likely the authentic fella is the guy who was homeless for 10 years, and because that's the life maybe not accidentally they were going to lead. Here I'll give you a practical example, right? There's a lovely person, um, I believe an authentic person, Noonan. I've forgotten his name. David Noonan, who's well
Yes,
known.
Doggy Dave. I'd call
Yeah,
him Doggy Dave. Yes,
yeah. But it's interesting that his father was involved in the Republican movement, and I suspect from that, the powers that be were kind of bearing down on his family maybe a little bit over the years. I think this is a practical reality. So he described that his sister had a fire in the house. It was just an accident, whatever. They just had to get housed for a little bit at the time. So the council put them up for I think a couple of weeks or whatever, and then the council turned around and said to this ordinary Irish family, "Oh, you own a car," meaning that's a wife, husband, and children. I don't know how many children, but I think more than one. You own a car. Hence, get out of here. This is the council house that they only had because their house was just renovated after a fire, and so it's only a temporary thing. And they told them to get lost out of that house just because they had a car, i.e., live in the car. His father and his wife and the children. Just the Irish County Council just tell them, "You go live in the car. Get out of this house." I think that they're doing that. I suspect that's a bit harsher because his family was of a Republican, background. That's where a lot of people are now coming from. Their lives aren't that great, not accidentally. I think. It's a very tragic story. You can see it in the interview. It's very depressing, but that's modern Ireland. What he described there, Irish people, that just the housing situation and lots of other things, they're terrible. The Irish healthcare is just a disaster for so many people. Never mind the housing.
But that decision must be made by some individual in the county council. How come how come this Dave fellow doesn't just come out and make an interview and say, Tommy County Councillor or whatever, he's the fellow. This is his picture. He put me out onto the street and he let people from the Sudan into the house instead. It sounds as if it's just crazy. I know it happened because I saw and
Yeah.
read about it, and
Oh,
I
no, no,
came across a video.
but anyways, it's universal. That's exactly the situation. There's housing estates been built at huge speed all around Ireland, and at least 95% of the people in it are immigrants. And that's just the reality, the length and breadth of the country. And then the interesting thing about it is that there's still a lot of naivety. You'll still find Irish people who save up and buy that one house that went to the Irish person as opposed to all the immigrants. And then they walk out the front door after everything is settled down, and they discover there's a line of African fellas staring at them every time they walk out the door. And they're just unbelievably self conscious. And now they want to sell the house and can't. You know,
No, why would anybody want to buy it? Because an Irish person doesn't want to be in that situation, and the people from Africa don't have the money to buy anything at all. So it's just,
oh, it's all government grants or NGOs or whatever. That's how they buy them. It's all given to them effectively.
is there any hope whatsoever? Or is it a done deal now that the Irish race, even though they don't recognize it themselves, they don't want to see it and they don't want to just accept it, in 50 years' time, is it the reality going to be that the Irish will not be there?
No, no, no. I've quite a lot of hope. I've actually thought that things are improving in Ireland. They're improving only a little bit, but they are actually improving. I mean, I described the situation with the mass migration. A few years ago, you just get run off the street if you said anything against mass immigration, but that's not the atmosphere now. The ordinary public have changed on that one. And it's not just that. You talk about the Tuam story that we're talking about there. I've been, pushing a rock up a hill for the that's 12 years. And for the first 4 or 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, getting nowhere. It's unbelievable. But it's not as bad now. There's quite a few people that are, talking about this. And you type up Tuam hoax and you get a lot of, references to it. It's definitely improving. It's a much better situation than it was a few years ago. And, but like, I know that it might be a strange way of looking at it, but there is such thing as the supernatural. And oftentimes people say that the church goes one way and eventually the country goes another. I mean, in this country, people have spent decades of their lives constantly sneering against the Catholic Church, which was created by God and all around the world. Now we have, at least monthly, a public rosaries in Ireland, which never happened before. And we have Corpus Christi processions and much better attended. I go around the Midlands of Ireland, and I'm telling you, the cemetery Sundays are gigantically. They're unbelievable. I travel around villages and think, what is going on here? There must be, some rock stars visiting, and it's just Cemetery Sunday. It's huge crowds going to it. There is a movement. The Catholic Church, somewhere along the way, is getting its act together. Of course, as a church, it isn't. It's actually, crushed on the SPX or whatever. But as a people, they're coming back to it, and that will change everything. Even though people don't understand that, but it will change everything because the bottom line is that there's a whole generation of Irish people, and they have uh, morals. They're ordinary people. They try to do the right thing. And for them, the right thing is very simple. You do what the state tells you to do, i.e., the law, i.e., the Gardaí. And that's the source of the sort of brainwashing atmosphere that we have in Ireland. It's very simple. You do the right thing. That means you follow the regulations, the state, the whatever. That's the brainwashing whereby people are locked into the system completely. Now, you bring along Catholicism, you bring along Christianity, sincere Christianity. You change in people's minds what is right and wrong. Then it's more a question of what's right is to tell the truth. What's all these other things from the Ten Commandments. That then changes your whole mentality. Then it's a question of is what the state doing is right or wrong. It's not a question of the state tells me to do it and then it's right. There are people out there who worship the Gardaí. They worship them. That's why we're a nation of informers. That's the other aspect of this. But that will change if the religion changes, and the religion is changing in Ireland. People are coming back to some sort of Christianity, and that's the one that'll change everything. You see, one of the things I would say is that what you should do in trying to understand what will happen or is happening in Ireland is to understand history, because history is not some database of things that you will see trends in history. And then when you see the trends happening now, you'll see how it happened in the future. What happened in Ireland when we got our independence, and people don't talk about this, but this is what happened. When we got our independence, we had first of all a religious revival. We did have a religious revival. About 1890 to 1910, it was a huge religious revival. They brought in sodalities, whatever. Then we had a cultural revival. Then we had a political revival, and then we had a military revival. It was came in that order and had to come that way. It's like cogs of a wheel. The first one to move was the religious revival. Before that, people were just too culturally wedded into the state. They were always going to do what the state told them to do. They were never really going to oppose it. When you had the religious revival, that changed everything, and you can see that the leaders of this, of the independence movement, etc., they were very religious. They were caught up in the religious revival in the first instance, and that's what changed everything going forward. So if that happens again, that's the hope. You know,
Okay, you mentioned four different revivals there, but the first one was the religious revival, and the other three followed them. So you're saying now to me that at the moment in 2026, you going around the Midlands and whatnot are seeing this religious revival, and
admittedly,
hoping the other three will follow as soon as possible.
yeah, okay, it's not a huge thing yet. All right, I admit that. Okay, right, you have me there.
Oh,
It's not
well,
a
you
big.
did say it was huge. Okay, go back to for the viewers now. Go back. Let's visit the last, the occasion that you saw this, whether it was last Sunday or last week or last
Yeah,
month or whatever.
yeah.
What exactly took place and how many people were involved?
Okay, well, this happened in a number of different places. I've seen it in Collinstown, in Chalcaman, which is in County Westmeath, both in County Westmeath, and I've seen it in Oldcastle. I was coming, I don't know where I was, and I was just coming through Oldcastle, and there was a lot of crowds in Oldcastle, but it's usually quite packed anyway with parking. But then you go through that past the cemetery, and I don't know. I think it could have been a mile and a half. I know people will be shocked. They'll think I'm raving, but I actually think it could have been as much as a mile and a half of cars leading away from the cemetery that were packed with cars. And that was just it for Cemetery Sunday. Cemetery Sunday is where the parish priest comes out and he blesses the graves. They just do a rosary and they bless the graves. That's all it is. But there was an enormous crowd there, and I've never seen as many before. I don't believe it is the case that it's traditionally that many. In those places, it seems to me to be far more than usual. It occurs about once a year in every graveyard around Ireland.
Though, this movement, though, is not being directed from the cardinal, the archbishop, the bishop, the priest. Is this more or less a grassroots
Yes.
breakaway Catholic grouping, or I just don't get it really. Uh,
Oh,
it's
very much so. It's not been led by the Catholic Church,
yeah,
not at all, not even to a tiny extent. So if you take a particular part of it, right? I mentioned the monthly public rosaries, right? They go onto the street and they say a rosary in the public square in Ireland. And so you ask yourself, well, where did that come from? That's a new thing, and it seems to be part of this revival. Well, on your YouTube channel, you can see an interview that I did with one of the guys. It was founded by two people, I think, effectively. One of the guys is, I think he's his office now in Knock. I forgot his name. But anyway, the guy I was talking to is a doctor in Antrim, and he saw a picture or something like that happening in Poland, and he decided it wasn't that the Polish people came to Ireland. He just decided we're going to do this, and he did it first in Antrim, and then it spread all around Ireland, and now he was saying that it spread around the world to a large extent. So totally grassroots phenomenon, not at all the case that he was encouraged to do it by some priest or some bishop or not at all. That didn't happen like that. That's absolutely not happening in Ireland, whereby it's coming from the church itself. It definitely isn't. All of this seems to be coming from the general public.
it's just an example of a mass changing of opinions. For example, in this country, there was two great revivals, and it was one in the 1750s, and there was the other one in the 1800s. And it just happened that this minister came out from England, George Whitfield, I believe his name was, and he just struck a chord, and tens of thousands of people would come to hear this guy speak. It's just you get the feeling that something like this could happen in Ireland if the right man came along,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If the right man
sort of
well,
a Daniel O'Connell maybe.
yeah, but also I think it's affecting people. It affects people's lives. I think if you have that guy again, the fellow with the vast amount of money in his bank, and he's wonderful, good health, and he's those fellows just maybe they're just too complacent and they just don't care, and maybe they're just too busy anyway. They don't study these things. Sometimes it is maybe a little bit of bad news hit a fella, and then they think about where they're going, and that's the phenomenon. We've had the COVID thing, and maybe people have had vaccines, and maybe they have had ill health because of that, or relatives of them have had ill health, and then they sort of reassess their lives and come back to the church a little bit. It's that plus there is such a phenomenon as the Catholic media. Like what is the Catholic media in this country? Before this, who knows? But nowadays you have all these Catholic bloggers, and I think they're doing good work. They're bringing people into the church.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I saw a bit changing subjects a bit. I saw a video on Facebook today or someplace, and it was a younger woman up in Northern Ireland, and she was a Protestant woman, a blonde woman, a Protestant woman. For anybody that might have seen the video, that's the one I'm talking about. And she was highlighting that the hatred the Protestants had for the Catholics and vice versa has fallen behind in intensity to the concern they have for their future. And now they realize that perhaps they might just need to bury the hatchet and forget about the past and come together. We had the bonfires, 12th of July. There was a lot of bonfires on the 12th of July, but the big one was the first time in hundreds of years, maybe, that the tricolor wasn't burdened on the big one. Instead, it was a mosque. And even more amazing that on the 15th of August, the Catholics over in Derry, they have bonfires as well. And for the first time, the focus was images of Sinn Féin leaders burdened on the bonfire. That is a historical change. Do you think that the thing that the authorities fear most of all is the hard men from both sides coming together up in the north and actually producing a military force? And perhaps this sort of fake IRA threat is a sort of a preemptive measure for the coming together of both sides.
Well, I can honestly say I don't know what to make of it. these new, as you say, this idea that the IRA is against mass immigration. All I can tell you is up to this has been the complete opposite. I've been in Dundalk, for example, on many occasions, and they are unbelievably put under unbelievable pressure. The mass migration, anti-mass migration protesters, by the whole Sinn Féin milieu. I think even Sinn Féin TDs turned up a protest there against the anti-mass. Up to this, the powers that be in the Republican movement, the Sinn Féin, are unbelievably pro-mass. And on the ground, I think it's fair to say virtually everybody looks upon Sinn Féin and the IRA as being an MI6 operation. Virtually everybody does that on the ground, even to the extent that when you hear about an Action Féin guy leading such a new political party, you just assume that that's MI6 moving into some other area because they're just so controlled. So I don't know. I mean, it's very surprising. Like if they're changing, well, it's interesting. I just wouldn't stick my neck out until I know more about it. It's interesting to speculate.
It's a testimony to the power of propaganda or mass psychosis that a regular working class person in either Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland will more or less vote for their own demise by voting for Sinn Féin. It's just a mystery to me.
Yeah, it's.
But the people on the ground, I know people that are up there in the north of Ireland, and they are crossing the divide and trying to set up dialogues with the other side. Is that one possibility that might have have some sort of hope for achieving something?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to speculate on that. Yeah, I hope it does. I hope they do get together on the anti-mass migration front. I think obviously you had the situation in Ballymena there about a year ago, and I was in Ballymena to have a look to what happening. But Ballymena is a very controlled town. It's like they have all of these former paramilitary places, Protestant paramilitary places all around Ballymena, that openly were UVF or UDA or, so I don't know whether I trust them or not, but, anyway, we'll see how it transpires. But there's another interesting aspect to this. I think it's definitely the case that the powers that be are now pushing in United Ireland. For me, that's definitely the case. They've arranged it behind the scenes. The Americans or the British or whatever, they want to have United Ireland. Why? They simply don't want the complication of the border, I think, going forward. If you talk about the COVID restrictions on the island of Ireland, what complicated it a lot was the border. So you could have massive restrictions on travelling out of Ireland or into Ireland. But all you have to do is go north and just, go south from there. And I think they just don't like that. I think they want, in fact, United Ireland, the powers that be. And I think on that front, I think unionism is under threat from them, the powers that be, American, British, whatever. They're moving towards the United Ireland at that level for whatever reason. You know.
I would advocate for not a 32 county Ireland at all. I would advocate for a one county Ireland where you would take the, let's say, for example, take the county of Antrim and ship all the people that have any sort of sanity up to Antrim and ship all the Lulus to the other 31 counties and at least have one sane place as a sort of a refuge. I'm not kidding. What is
Mm,
about to come down the pike?
mm,
People will be looking for a refuge or a sanctuary.
mm, mm.
I'll settle for one
Yeah,
county.
yeah. Well, who knows what's going to happen on that front? But we're also going to get events. It's like somebody said about politics. What happens, what changes things was events, dear boy, events. We're going to get international events. Obviously, COVID came to us internationally, and that changed the whole scene in Ireland. I think that's going to happen again. Now, what event? I think the obvious thing is, as you know, because I wrote it on your web forum, just by pure chance, I happened to be at a history lecture kind of thing, and I was just talking to a guy who I later realised was a general in the British Army not a lot long ago. And he told me that because I quizzed him carefully, but I grilled these people mercilessly whenever I got a chance. And he told me that there would be an 80% chance of at least a tactical nuclear weapon going off within the next 2 years. Now that's a very serious statement. Now, that would be at least a tactical nuclear weapon. But he also mentioned the strategic nuclear arsenal of Russia, meaning strategic nuclear weapons. He didn't seem to rule it out, is what I'm saying. He didn't say that was an 80% chance, but he didn't seem to think it was impossible that the whole Russian strategic nuclear weapon would be deployed. But anyway, if we talk about a tactical nuclear weapon, now if that was to go off, maybe in the context of Russia, in the context of the Middle East, it'll have a quite a dramatic effect internationally, I think, and on the populations of all those places. So I think that's something that people, ought to think about. And can I just address one thing that, because on your web forum, I was just watching some of the debate that's been about this, whether they would use a nuclear weapon or not. And one of the things is nobody gains from this. But there's an obvious person that gains from that, and those are the people who own nuclear weapons. You see, if you think about it, if I'm the United States, right, I have a debate with, say, the Danish government about Greenland. Now, at this point, the Danish government probably does worry that the Americans could land troops on Greenland, because they probably would, even though they're supposedly allies, etc. But at least the Danish government never thinks in its wildest dreams that the US government would ever use any type of nuclear weapon on them. That's just, you know. So, but if nuclear weapons started to go off, if they were more commonly used, then the Danish government would start to think, well, actually, maybe they would bomb at least an EMP type thing, or whatever. That could happen. And once that's in the Danish government's mind, then you can see that the power starts to go back to those countries that have a lot of nuclear weapons. It's very simple. Once the nuclear weapons start to get more widely used, the people who have them get more power. So people needn't be thinking that, oh, nobody gains from the use of nuclear weapons. That's not the case. The people who own nuclear weapons will be delighted to see them be more, people be more afraid of them, because they own these, big sticks, if you like, and now they can use them. So I think it could happen.
I cannot for the life of me understand people that say there's no way that nuclear weapons will be used again. They just cannot accept it. They will not accept that it's going to be. It's an, in my opinion, it's an absolute given that there'll be tactical nukes used on Ukraine.
Yeah, yeah,
They're just being set up. It's. I'd say before the end of the year, but I thought it would be already at this stage. The technology that's been given to Ukraine with these drones, and they're flying 700, 800 miles, 1,000 miles, and hitting Moscow.
mm,
There seems to be a large section of people that think that Ukraine can defeat Russia. That is an impossibility because, as you say, the Russians have a big stick. And the big stick, they're not going to take a beating and be defeated when they have the big stick. That just doesn't happen. If I'm being defeated and if I have a big stick, I'm
mm.
going to pull out that big stick and I'm going to whack them.
Yeah, and like people when they think about nuclear weapons, they only ever think of the huge, big strategic ones. See, obviously, if Russia was to launch strategic nuclear, i.e., the very big intercontinental, huge yokes with massive,
Yeah.
then yeah, it could be the end of the world if you like, and then Russia loses with the end of the world to everybody else. But we're not talking about that. We're talking
No,
about
we're not talking
smaller.
about that at
Yeah,
all.
we're talking.
We're talking
Yeah,
about we're talking about micro nukes. It could only be
yeah,
Hiroshima was 16 kilotons. A micro nuke is just 1 kiloton. Just fire that off and give them a little taste of it. And if they don't sort themselves out,
yeah.
then send a 20 kiloton after it.
So, something like
People
that.
don't. People just don't grasp the nuclear weapon situation. I had a fellow out on a tour. He was a retired commander of a nuclear submarine, and I says, how many missiles did you have at your control? How many warheads? He says, that is classified information. We're not allowed to talk about that even in retirement. And I replied, I says, I believe that type of submarine has um, 24 missiles, each with 16 warheads. Or maybe now it was 16 missiles with 24 warheads. I forget which it was because it was some years ago. But that fellow at his disposal had 360 or 380 nuclear bombs. And that's just one submarine. If that thing sailed into the Black Sea, if it was a Russian submarine, which is an American submarine, but anyway, if that was in the Black Sea, he fires one missile and he deposits 24 bombs on the Ukraine, and it's end of story. I just don't understand this people saying there'll be no nuclear weapons used. I think Iran could be nuked tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
You know, the United States, the United States ain't gonna. The United States is no different than Russia. The United States is not going to accept a defeat.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Because if they do, the guys on the Mediterranean are in a bit of a pickle. Those
Yeah.
guys ain't going to be in a pickle.
Yeah, and the point is, you use it just a little bit on one of those countries, and every other country knows the score. We're afraid of you now. Oh yeah, we'll do what you do, what you tell us to do. You
It's,
know, that's the
they'll know
reality.
the score very quickly.
Yeah.
And the
Well,
score is,
yeah, whereas now they're not afraid of it because they don't think it'll ever be used. So this is the benefit for them of using it. And of course, even a small one will have the EMP effect. So that could have a major effect on the battlefield. So and without causing the huge, the huge radiation fallout thing. So not necessarily a huge radiation fallout.
is it possible, or are they just complete puppets doing what they're told with no minds of their own? But let's for a moment say that they have a mind of their own. Is it possible that the leader of Germany, that tall, freakish looking guy, or the leader of Poland, or the leader of Romania, is it possible that those guys actually think they can fight a, a war against Russia and it remaining conventional and they can actually defeat Russia? Are these guys totally crazy? They're just not in the real world at all.
Yeah, we seem to be drifting along towards the war with Russia. And like, I mean, why? Like, it doesn't seem like a very good idea at all. But just, like let's put it this way. I mean, people would say it couldn't happen. Well, look what America did with the war in Iran. Why did they launch into a war with Iran? Nobody can
Well,
really figure it out.
it's,
No,
it's easy
they just
enough to understand why they went in a war in Iran because it was the seventh country in the list.
yeah. Well, no very good reason, and they just went to war anyway.
But no, there
So
was a good reason. Of
yeah,
course, there was a good reason. But we're
yeah,
not allowed to say it on YouTube. The seven countries were Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Sudan, was it Somalia? And the final one, anyway, number seven was Iran. And now we're
yeah,
at number seven. The other six have been taken off the chessboard because they were a danger to the other guys.
yeah, yeah.
Iran, Iran ain't going to get. Iran is not going to come out of this victorious. And if it is, it's going to be a world-shattering event. I don't expect that to happen because, again, at the end of the day, the United States have the big stick, and I'm telling you, if they could whack a couple of Japanese cities, they'll certainly sizzle these Iranians.
Yeah, but that begs the question then: is Iran under some nuclear umbrella? Would the Russians retaliate if you attack, or the North Koreans if you attack Iran
I
with
don't
nuclear?
believe that. The Russians aren't going to sacrifice themselves for Iran. Why should they? It's every man
Yeah,
for himself.
yeah, but
Um,
in
I
general,
think. I think. For example, if Russia, they could have saved Assad if they wished by just nuking these guys coming down, but they didn't. They didn't risk it. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing, but on a slightly bigger scale. If Iran is going to get overrun, Russia will not sacrifice themselves for the Iranians. It ain't going to happen. And as soon as the Iranians get pasted, well, the next morning, Russia will paste the Ukrainians. And then there'll be two problems solved for one for the United States and one for Russia. And then we'll be in a different ballgame. But as far as the people that say that nuclear weapons will not be used, I
Yeah,
don't think those guys are in the real world at all. I don't know.
yeah, I agree. But I think overall, this Iran-U.S. conflict has been slated to last a long time. They want it to last a long time because they're going to use that as the excuse for the energy clampdown, which they want anyway, for the reason of just crushing the populations in the West quite deliberately. They want the energy clampdown, and they need an excuse on your television screens for the energy clampdown. So you're not going to blame America or anybody else. You're going to blame the Iranians. And that's the plan. State of Hormuz, etc., etc. And it's not a grand conspiracy, which it actually is. It was a deliberate policy, But so it'll for me anyway. It'll go on a long time, and it'll have various characteristics. I think one of the characteristics would be that the Americans will want to have bases inside Iran for whatever they do next. In other words, they're currently you have these ships way off in the Indian Ocean because they're afraid to go near the Iranian coast. And other than that, the Americans are trying to operate out of bases in Bahrain and Kuwait and all these other places, which have been bombed to bits and far too close to the Iranians for the drones, etc. So their plan is that if they can get just even a little bit of Iran, say on the southeast corner or the northwest corner of the Kurdish region, the southeast corner, that there's also a tribe down there. If they can just get in there, at least they can build up their troops or whatever on Iranian soil, rather than having to be offshore or relying on these old bases that are just been whacked. So that's another plan. I think there'll be that limited ground invasion of Iran will occur. I guess.
Maybe there will not be a ground invasion. Maybe it'll just stay in a stalemate for quite a while. Because the stalemate suits the United States very well. Because the victims of the stalemate will be India and China and those other Eastern Asian countries that rely 60-70% of their energy comes from the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf ain't affecting the United States supply. The United States has got more oil that they can shake, that they know what to do with. They've got it from Alaska, they've got it from the shale, and now they've got it from Venezuela. So obviously the United States, okay, the strait is closed. That's good for the United States. And the higher the oil goes, the better. It's not good for Europe though. They're going to get
Yeah,
they're going to get a little cold. If you're cold in the middle of August,
yeah, and but
it'll be very cold
yeah,
in January.
yeah, but the other aspect to this is that the Strait of Hormuz could be the beginning of a long-term sort of quasi-war situation surrounding all the choke points of the world. So you have the English Channel, you have the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Straits there at the Red Sea, and also the Straits of Malacca. So I mean, America has a gigantic navy, and if it moved in and controlled some of these choke points, like Gibraltar, although a lot of debate about Ceuta and all that in Morocco. If you can control those choke points, you can control world trade, and they might just go to do that using their huge navy.
At the moment, the enemy of the United States is China. The enemy of the United States is not Russia. Russia is not ever going to be a threat to the United States. It's not going to displace it with technology. It's not going to displace it with chips. It's not going to displace it with artificial intelligence. It's not going to displace it with anything at all. So the enemy is China. Keep that Strait of Hormuz closed forever, and China is screwed. Now, having said that, as soon as the Strait of Hormuz was closed, China started swinging and shifting their energy needs from oil to coal. Those guys, I think they were building one coal electric plant a week or something like that. Everybody else is complaining about global warming. The
Yeah,
Chinese are producing one coal-fired power station. I think it was one a week, or maybe it was one a day. Anything is possible in China. But whatever it was, anyway, they are now gone to the coal.
yeah.
Um, Maybe it's a
So,
war not against Iran, but maybe it's a war against China.
yeah, which they get from Australia, and they have a big influence on Australia. the Chinese. But for me anyway, that's nation states, if you like. And so in other words, you talk about the interests of America as a state and the interests of
Yes,
you know, COVID showed that we're already past the point where we seem to have international control over nearly all these countries because they all follow the COVID crooked script. Now, how is that if they're independent countries? There seems to be more international power. So the real game is against the populations. They
yes.
already control the countries in which are all these places. And now you've got to bear down on the populations. So how do you do that? Mass immigration should be able to crush sense of community, a national identity, and all these other things. That's very deliberately you crush that. Now you get this cost of living thing should bear down on the populations, and so that's what it is. It's a war between these Epstein class elites who cooperate in most of these countries, including China. In my opinion, China and the United States. It's a war between of them against the population. You know,
Yes,
that,
before my last paragraph, I should have interjected with myself and pointed, if you still believe in what we are supposed to believe, and it's the nation states still being unique individual entities,
yeah, yeah.
then that will be that. But
You see,
they're not. They're it, they, as we saw in the COVID, even the newscasters of every country were reading the exact same
yeah,
orders were coming from someplace and being delivered.
yeah, yeah.
And in that case, the war is not going to be against the United States, against China, or anything else. The war in that situation is to reduce the population down to, they say 500 million, but I believe now that that should be adjusted down to about 100 million. Down there in Georgia, in the United States,
Yeah, the
in a place,
Guidestones.
yeah, there was a place called Alberton, uh, and I meant to go down there, but the bloody whores, they blew it up about 3 years ago or whatever.
Yeah,
And I was down in Georgia about this time last year. I went to the Cumberland Gap. I did a lot of things down in Georgia, but the one thing I would have liked to have done down in Georgia, but it did not exist, was to see the Georgia Guidestones.
yeah,
But the Georgia Guidestones was erected in '83, I think it was, at very large expense. People spent a lot of money, and they put up those stones, and they had in 10 languages. They were the Guidestones because they were laying out the guidelines for the future in 10 different languages. But they were saying that the population was going to be reduced in those days. And sure enough, now that we're in the final stages of things, to no great surprise that the Guidestones were blown up.
yeah. Yeah, but the other point, obvious point again, is this war against the populations is obviously you have a war, you have wartime restrictions. So now you energize enormously the war against social media. You have, in Ukraine, Ukraine is the model here. They're at war, so they introduce gigantic restrictions. You're not allowed to have opposition parties, opposition media of any type, etc., etc. So you'll enter into this Orwellian police state world even more so because everything they do gets you there. They're looking to build a totalitarian state, and the wartime atmosphere will help to bring that about as well.
There's a lady over there in Ireland. I'd like to watch her on Facebook. Noreen O'Shea.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
She's one of the very few that seems to have a grasp of the digital prison that's been introduced and
yeah,
the social credit score, etc.
yeah,
I do see some sort of the beginnings of a fight back against that in this country. In this country, we've got cameras called flag cameras or flock cameras or whatever, and they actually read number plates,
mm,
and they've been in operation now for quite a while. There's one
mm,
here in Dedham, they're all over the place. But the public are beginning to realize that it's against the American psyche, these
mm,
cameras, and now they're being destroyed
mm,
by persons unknown.
yeah,
And the thing about the United States is even a town
yeah,
can bring in an ordinance
yeah,
outlawing them.
yeah,
So there is a bit of a fight back. And
Yes, yeah,
also, I've noticed that I have discovered the magic of AI. I use it to design stuff and whatnot. I just see that a significant amount of the people up to will say 17 to 25, that age group, that they really dislike AI. And if I was to send an AI meme or whatever, they don't like it. So there is a little bit of a possibility of,
yeah,
the old saying, what happens in the United States will be happening in Ireland in 5 years' time. But that was a long time ago. What happens in the United States will be happening in Ireland in 5 months' time. So there might be a little bit of a kickback.
mm.
I don't know if they have those flock cameras over there, but
Well, yeah, you have cameras everywhere anyway. I think that was pioneered in Ireland. That idea of automatic recognition of number plates. I think they integrated that into the computers in Northern Ireland. I think maybe as early maybe as the 70s or 80s. I suspect so anyway. And they had a particular a part, I think, of their computerization, which they did in the north, to integrate automatic recognition of number plates into their, because they built the perfect security state, in the north of Ireland. One of the things being this automatic recognition of number plates. So it's interesting. So if you want to know what's going to happen now, just check the north of Ireland over the last few years. You know, yeah, I
before
mean,
we
you know,
before we sort of sign off now, because this is sort of a general chat about everything,
yeah, yeah.
has the fact that 5 people been killed in that car crash, has that sort of opened up a scab and exposed the wounds of Ireland? What is your general thoughts on that? Because I know a lot of people that have got very upset, and people that I thought were aware of the program, they have been upset. It's the one event that seems to have upset not half the people. It has upset 7/8 of the people for 7 different reasons, if you know what I mean. What's your general thought on that situation?
Well, a lot of the ordinary services in Ireland, have collapsed in the last few years. It's like we have, policing is one of them. I mean, you have protests, the place is covered in Gardaí, and then you have huge court cases that go on. They pursue the tiniest little thing and try and get people to jail for ages on small matters. Whereas when it comes to ordinary crime, it's collapsing. So the one guy there, I think he was on his third session. He was already convicted, I think, twice or something for the same type of offence. I think going down the wrong way. I think he was a Polish guy, wasn't he? And he's out on bail, and nobody really cares. That's the way it works. The same with the health system in Ireland. It's just nobody cares. It's collapsing in a heap.
Yes, nobody seems to care.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the ordinary Joe sub work hasn't been done. Yeah. I mean, you have even dereliction in a lot of places in Ireland now. It's kind of sad. So yeah, it's a lot of problems building up. All right.
I have been advocating for small little groups of people, we'll say 6 people, one guy sort of organizing the other 5, and just be a sort of a patrol around their village. But yet, the people aren't at that stage yet. They still want to stay in their house and they want to watch TV and they just do not care. They're just not willing to get out there and get together with 5 other lads. It seems like a small thing to ask, but yet it hasn't happened,
Yeah,
which I find very strange.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's true. I suppose it takes a big commitment to go out every night. I mean, it wouldn't happen that often. That doesn't make much of a difference.
You didn't even need to go out every night.
Yeah,
It would be a big commitment for one fellow to be out every night because that'd be his full-time job. But we'll
yeah,
say if you had
mm,
10 fellows or whatever, and 5 of them go out one night, just once a week.
yeah,
So that would mean that a man would be going out once a fortnight because there's 10 of them. Not just patrol the area because you cannot really prevent. crime because it's sort of like a flash mob, they'll avoid you. But the
mm,
important thing would be to have 6 men, and I'm talking fairly sturdy men, that you could call in an emergency.
mm.
It's sort of like Dad's army, I guess, in a sense. I just
Yeah,
don't. I just am waiting for something, somebody back there, just to organize something. Or I'm
yeah,
just at my wit's end.
yeah. Well, we'll see what'll happen anyway. But yeah, something like that could happen, I guess.
All right. Well, we'll call it a day here because this is just an experiment, and it's not even on my main. We have been live on YouTube, but I didn't give any advance notes or whatever because I didn't know if it would work out fairly good. But
Yeah.
we'll call it a day here for this one, and we'll see how this goes, and we'll upload.